So then I was like, you know that's not in the Bible, right? And she was like,
Say what?
what?
That's Not in the Bible podcast, the podcast where we talk about popular worldly topics and whether or not they are biblical. Joining me today are two distinguished guests, a Mr. Joe Marie Shanky. No, Marie isn't your middle name, sorry. Joe Shanky and Drew Burtis. So, well, you're not going to believe it. It could only happen live. I just cleared all of my notes. So, Joe, let's talk about a little bit of your educational history. You got your undergrad at Trinity, was that right?
That's right outside of Chicago.
Yes. And so, what did you study for your undergrad?
Applied Christian Ministries.
Okay, Applied Christian Ministries, and you actually went back for your master's.
At the Master's College out in California.
Yes, at the Master's College of California, where you studied
biblical counseling.
All right. So you, if I'm correct in saying, you are actually a master of biblical counseling, correct?
A Jedi Master.
There, wow. All the Star Wars fans out there, buckle up. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, if Word of Life staff members were a character in Star Wars, Joe would be Master Yoda. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, the voice, the size. He's even wearing a green shirt. I mean, come on. And Joe, in my notes, used to say that you enjoy spending time with your you were a pastor for 32 years?
No, you got that backwards.
No, you were a Word of Life staff member for 32 years.
That's
How
correct.
long did you pastor?
I was the pastor of family and counseling at a church in South Jersey for 8 years.
Wow, okay. So an extensive ministry history. You enjoy spending time with your 9 grandkids watching Bluey?
That is correct. That is correct. That is correct.
Joe, we should have done an intro like that. I don't know why we didn't do that.
Hey, put it in your notes for next
Yeah,
time. but
and
don't delete it.
your grandson, Jojo, is here.
That's correct.
Give it up for Jojo.
All right, yeah, that's right.
JoJo.
Wherever you are. Joe Trimble, ladies and gentlemen. Our camera guy, right in the middle. Just make him uncomfortable. Now he has to stand there. Everyone stare at the back of Joe's head and just, no, I'm joking. Coming to another one of our distinguished guests, Mr. Drew Burtis. Drew, you are a Word of Life grad. Both of you are Word of Life grads.
Correct.
You got your undergrad from Clark Summit University.
Correct.
In what?
Sports ministry.
Sports ministry. You are a big volleyball player, I could tell.
Yeah.
Or croquet, water polo. Okay,
Yep.
So we're moving on.
You're
So you went
spot
to
on.
Clark Summit University for water polo. Big whoop. So, no, I'm joking. I love you. To Drew Burtis. That was my toast.
I appreciate
so
that.
Drew, you got your Master's of Divinity.
I do.
From where?
Faith Bible Seminary
Faith Bible
in
Seminary.
Indiana.
In Indiana. Awesome.
Yes.
So you are, again, like we said in recent podcasts, you are a Master of the Divine.
Yeah, not to the level of Jedi Master.
Sure.
Like Joe.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Sure.
We still call him His Eminence.
His Eminence, that's right. We do refer to Drew as His Eminence when he enters the building. I should mention, Joe, you are currently serving as the. Could you tell us what you do here in Word of Life? I know in my head what you do, but I don't know the exact wording of the title.
Yes, I'm the Director of Counseling for the Center of Biblical Counseling.
That's right. The only one we have.
The only one, yeah.
Globally. And Drew, you are currently serving as the Dean of Students here at the Word of Life Bible Institute.
Correct.
All right.
And fun fact,
Fun fact.
the Dean of Students, when I was here as a student 12 years ago, is sitting right across the table from
Hey,
me.
Whoa.
same Dean of Students. Come on, high five. All right, save it for later.
How dare you?
No. Okay, come on, get me.
Jordan, you're getting so funny.
I'm getting. Drew, tell us
wait,
about...
wait. How come I didn't get one?
Oh, high five, Joe. Come on.
Okay.
Genius students.
There we go.
You can't high five with these stinking mics. So, Drew, tell us about those prescription glasses.
Yeah, they are not.
That's
Jordan
okay.
likes to make fun
If
of my
you're-
glasses. They are not prescription glasses. They're blue light glasses, and I like the look of them. So
All the better to see my beautiful face, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Crystal clear.
So you can see how much I look like Mr. Beast.
That's right. Because we have the Mr. Beast look-alike.
Whatever.
And he's giving away money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just
You tonight could win here in the crowd.
yeah, we're giving away these notes if you want them. So basically, if you haven't watched an episode of That's Not in the Bible podcast, then you're missing out. Go to the Snow Camp YouTube channel, watch on our Facebook YouTube, or watch on our Facebook. We live stream it to Facebook.
Yes.
Word of Life Snow Camp. Check it out. 5 past episodes. Tonight will be the 6th. And we talk about all sorts of things. Every topic is different, so make sure you check that out. Tonight, we are going to be talking about mental health. So I'm thinking of some Bible characters, right? A few Bible characters come to my mind when thinking about mental health. We talk about David, we talk about Elijah and Saul. Now David, right, a man after God's own heart. We read about the victory, we hear about the giants falling. But little did people know, David probably actually struggled with depression and anxiety. Right? Read something like Psalm 42, where he talks about, he basically cries himself to sleep every night. He's eating his tears, kind of a weird food choice. I would eat like actual food and not my tears, but you know what? I get the sentiment of it. Elijah, has just had this victory after the prophets of Baal, right? And he runs into a cave and says, Lord, would you just let me die because I feel very much alone. And then you have characters like Saul, who's kind of like an like you don't want to do what Saul does. Saul is a lesson to learn from, right? Don't be like Saul, who through comparison and taking his eyes off of God and putting them on other people, he actually spirals into madness. It says that he thrashed around his house just like a crazy person. And so these are probably some biblical characters that for further study and encouragement, if you guys want to when you get home, read the story of David, Elijah, and Saul and just see what lessons and steps they took to get over that, or for Saul's case, how not to slip into something like that. For Saul, I think it was a kind of that spiritual influence, which we'll talk about tonight. So talking about mental health, gentlemen, when I say mental health, what comes to the mind of not only us, but our audience?
Yeah, I think the top two, probably the ones that are widely recognized, mostly talked about, are the topics of anxiety and depression. Those would be the two most common ones, and maybe there's some that are listening to this or in this room that would say, yeah, I've gone through anxiety, or I have it currently, or I'm depressed. I went through a season of depression. We even talk about, just even up here in New York, in the Adirondacks, in the winter, there's this thing called seasonal depression, where we don't see the sun for long periods of time and can make us very sad and depressed. And so those are kind of the two that I would say come to mind first and foremost. And that's the ones we're going to specifically talk about tonight. We don't have the time to go into every aspect of mental health, but we want to talk about the two most common ones, anxiety and depression.
Sure.
And I just want to define them so that we all know what we're talking about. And
Because there's a lot of definitions.
there are.
And people can self-diagnose.
Yes.
WebMD, check it out. No, I'm joking. Don't go to WebMD, please.
Sometimes you can check WebMD and you just find out you're dying.
I know.
So it
My
can be
toe
doom and
hurts.
gloom. So
I'm dying.
yeah, anxiety is this, and these are just kind of a collaboration of definitions if you just look on the internet. Anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And I think most of us in the room, if not all of us, could say, yeah, there's been times where I've been anxious, right? Maybe it's not been a consistent, persistent anxiety attack, but there are times where I've been anxious. And then depression is this idea of being kind of persistent persistent sadness and a lack of interest in or pleasure in previously rewarding or enjoyable activities. So it's kind of this like despair, on an all of life scale. And
Yeah.
so those are kind of the things that we want to talk about: anxiety, depression. How does the world talk about it? How does the Word talk about it?
Yeah.
You know, different things like that. So, but there's a question that comes with even these two things: anxiety and depression.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes at the heart of the struggle, especially in an audience like this, maybe those that are listening as well, that where does it come from? You know, is this a physical issue? Is there something going on in my body, or is this a spiritual issue? You know, is it because I don't have enough faith, I don't believe enough, and those are legitimate questions.
Yeah, good questions to ask.
Those are really good questions, or is it a combination of both? And how does the spiritual and the physical, how do they intermix?
Yeah, yeah.
And so these are important questions, because sometimes people might fall into one ditch or another ditch on two sides of the road here, and that is making it all physical or making it all spiritual, and not understanding maybe the complexity that's involved. Perhaps the answers may sound simple, but the complexity of the process is maybe another aspect. Now,
Yeah.
one qualifier for us too: we are not medical professionals.
Sure. Well,
You know,
speak for
so-
yourself. I mean, I went to Harvard Medical. No, I'm joking. Look at me. I barely passed preschool. Go ahead.
How'd you do it to be? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that in mind, there is that physical element that we have to keep in mind, and
Right.
so we're going to really be talking about how to navigate through this, and our goal is try to be as practical. Certainly in 30 minutes, we're not going to be able to
Sure.
unpack two very complex issues.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
there are the aspect too is, what does the world say? What does
Yeah,
the Scripture say?
Yeah,
Exactly.
and even kind of a note on that too, right? We don't want to come across as neglecting the physical side of mental
Exactly.
health, right?
Right.
We understand that. Just because we're not medical professionals doesn't mean that's not a reality,
Right.
or something you've experienced. And so we want to come across this in a very compassionate way as well. Not necessarily beating people up for
Right.
for
Sure.
mental health, but
100%.
rather, okay, it's something that we deal with.
Yeah.
How do we deal with it well?
Yeah.
And,
right.
and it's interesting, even as you think about the different struggles that we as human beings have, anxiety is a universal struggle. Not everybody struggles with addictive behavior, for example. But let's face it, if we're honest, we all worry.
Yeah.
And we all struggle with the what ifs. We live in a scary world.
Yeah.
And so that is a universal issue that we have to confront. So we're certainly not speaking from it as okay, just follow us, we got it all together kind of a thing. We're kind of working through some of these issues ourselves.
So we talked a little bit about, when we talk about mental health, what immediately comes to mind? You mentioned anxiety, depression. Let's just gauge, what does the world have to say about this topic of mental health? Like, what is the world telling us about this?
Yeah, we'll start kind of with this idea that the world, the culture we live in, has a really hard time distinguishing between the material and the immaterial. Even just a few weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about the reality of the spiritual realm.
Sure, yeah.
Right, and how it's actually more real than the visible, tangible conversation we're having right now, that there's a spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And the world has a really hard time dividing between the material and immaterial. We asked the question even at the beginning, is it a physical problem, or is it a spiritual problem, or is it a combination? And so when the world approaches mental health, a lot of times it can't make the connection or harmonize the fact that there is both material and immaterial involved.
Right. It's even hard for them to understand, not being like, we're talking world like almost unbelievers. We're unbelievers, right? And so for them, a lot of them really, they come from that material background, right?
Yeah.
The world exists only in that which I can see, taste, touch, smell, like that's real. And so for them, the idea of an immaterial,
Right.
so there's even some groundwork that needs to be laid there, right?
Absolutely. And then on the heels of that, they always talk about this idea of getting you back to normal.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
The problem with that is the definition of normal changes from person to person. And so kind of the world, in a way, the culture we live in, is almost shooting at a moving target on, okay, how do we move you from abnormal, struggling with anxiety or depression, to normal? And really what we come back to as believers and as followers of Jesus is normal doesn't really exist post-Genesis 3. If you go back to Genesis 3, right? Genesis 1 and 2, the creation account of the world.
Yep.
God creates everything, and after every successive day, he says he creates it, and it was good.
Yeah.
Everything was good. And then Genesis 3 comes into the picture. The serpent deceives Adam and Eve. Sin enters the world, and things are all of a sudden not good.
Right.
And there's this distortion of what God created as good. And so as the world kind of tries to navigate material, immaterial, normal, abnormal, we really come back to we're all living in this sin-distorted, fallen world. And how do we live in that, right? Like, how do we come back to normal and abnormal? And I know Joe's got a great resource and a perspective that may help us navigate this a little bit.
Yeah, there was a great resource available written by Dr. Mike Emlet. He's a medical doctor. He's also seminary trained. And he has a book called Saint, Sufferer, and Sinner. And really draws and these ideas together about the fact that, how does Genesis 3 impact our world, our humanity, understanding our humanity through the fall and even through the redemption of Christ, and how that does make a difference. The temporary status that we live in will not always be what it's going to be, but it is broken right now.
Yeah.
But how would that look practically and specifically in what we're talking about now, and in sorting out the spiritual and the physical? The reason there is disease, so maybe anxiety or depression, there's some malfunction in the brain, in their neurological system, and so we're going to treat that, and a doctor is going to treat that and examine and prescribe and all the rest of that. So the reason for that is because the world is broken. So that's why and that's not our fault. That's not our fault. We don't bear any responsibility. It's not something we did. But yet, at the same time, we got to live through that. Now, sometimes our anxiety may also come from the fact that, we've been bullied. We live in an environment that's really hurtful and painful. Here's where that sin doctrine or that sin idea comes from. We're sinned against. And that's something we have to learn how to be sinned against, because when we're sinned against, that hurts. We don't like it.
Yeah.
And where do we go with it?
Yeah.
How do we deal with it? And then the other thing might be at times, let's face it, I think all of us would admit that we do make bad choices in life.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel bad about those choices or scared. What's going to happen if somebody discovers what I've done? What will my parents think? What will my friends think? What will all of that then can create some anxiety too.
And worry,
worry,
exactly.
Guilt. How do you deal with guilt and those kinds of things?
Yeah.
So now you see the complexity.
Yeah.
Sometimes my anxiety might be because something's not functioning right physically inside of me, or maybe it's because I'm living in this broken world and people hurt one another. How do I deal with that? But at the same time, I make bad choices. Now let's scramble it around a little bit. Sometimes my worry and my anxiety could have nothing to do with me originally. Wasn't my choice. I didn't start this to get the bullying. Somebody else did, or I don't know what's the matter with my brain. But then what happens is, because it doesn't feel good, and we don't like the way we feel, we run to something to take the pain away.
Yeah.
And sometimes those choices aren't good. And they make it worse.
Yeah.
And so now, and then when we make that choice and we know it's bad, then we start feeling guilty. And so what's actual responsibility belong to me? What's not my fault? And it gets really blurred, and somebody can be stuck in that.
Yeah.
And and here's the thing, we're always trying to get rid of things.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about, kind of from our worldly perspective per se, is the goal is let's just cure it.
Yeah.
Now, of course, who wouldn't want a disease to be cured, obviously?
Right.
But in that, we might be undermining something else. Sometimes things aren't cured. You know, if sometimes we have to live through, because again, the world is broken. Things may not go away. And just because we're anxious and we want it to go away, certainly, but we live in a scary world. Those scary things may not go away.
Yeah.
So those are the things we have to, sometimes what we need may not just be medicine. Medicine is good. It's a grace perhaps God has given us at this time, but what sometimes we need too is help in living through difficulty. We have to learn how to navigate the hardships, life problems. I think you were saying earlier, it's not if something happens, it's
When, yeah.
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 And those are the things that are important. We don't want to just look for the short term.
Sure, yeah.
This might be a process more than a cure.
Yeah.
Because in God's process, in God's redemptive plan, his idea, his goal is to grow us. We want the cure, we want it to go away, and I understand that. But in that, some things don't go away, but there is still hope in the fact that God is taking us through a process to actually make us more like Christ.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit about what the world has to say about mental health, right? And Joe, you talked very wisely about, our quick out, how everyone, who when they get a headache doesn't want to run the first thing that says, hey, let me go get some ibuprofen, right, or something like that. We're always looking for that quick out, and that can even lead to further guilt. And so, again, you're not just looking for the cure, right, because that could be problematic for you. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked about what the world has to say about mental health. Let's talk about what the Word has to say about mental health.
Yeah. This is kind of the distinction. We, again, posed the question at the beginning, right? Is it physical or is it spiritual? And a lot of times it's a combination of both, right? Maybe something is physically present, and that's why we say, medicine could be a very good thing for you. It can help you in that. But there is the problem of indwelling sin, and so at kind of the lowest common denominator, it is a spiritual issue,
right?
Mental health. That's kind of where it falls, and so we want to hit the spiritual side, like we said. We're not
well, even if it's physical, it's spiritual, right? You trace it all the way back to Genesis 3, like we were talking about, right?
Because we're still spiritual beings as well,
beings, right.
And so with it being a lot how dealing with spiritual health, right? That's what the Word talks about more than anything is spiritual health.
Sure.
And there's this one passage that we came to and really is the one we want to focus on, and we're going to bring it back at the end because we really want to leave the listeners with this passage, and it's Matthew chapter 11, verses 29 and 30. Really the Word talking about spiritual health.
Sure.
All of us with the consequences of sin, with mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, they can become very tiring and energy draining. We're dealing with this worry or this deep despair,
right?
And it just takes a lot out of you, especially if you've carried it for a long time.
Yeah.
There may be listeners that have dealt with anxiety for years, that have been in a depression that has lasted months. And when you carry that, it can be very, very heavy, and exhausting, and energy draining. And the encouragement found in Matthew 11 is this beautiful invitation from Jesus. So Jesus is speaking, and he says this, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden." Like just stop there. One, there's an invitation, right? Coming to me. Jesus is inviting. It's not go to this other thing or run to this place. No, it's
Exactly like
come
what we
to
talked
me.
about with medicine, right? Like sometimes
Yeah.
we just want to get rid of the problem and we just run to the first thing that we think will take care of the issue.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, stop, come to me, right?
Come
And
to me, like
right.
like in inviting you into his
Yeah.
presence, all who are weary and heavy laden.
Yeah.
And that goes back to those mental health things,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that's the burden that you're carrying. Maybe that's what's making you tired and taking a lot of your energy.
Yeah.
And he says this, and I will give you rest. It's not I'm going to give you a to-do list. It's not I'm going to say go do X, Y, and Z and you'll be cured and or
Right.
you'll have victory.
sure,
I'm going to give you rest. And
yeah,
isn't that what we all want?
right,
Right.
I think we all want that rest, even in a culture that is so go, 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 busy, 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 on to the next thing. I mean, we're experiencing it on a micro level at snow camp. It's
Yeah.
44 hours and it's boom, 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 boom. You go
Yeah.
through all of these things. And Jesus offers us rest. And then he
Right.
continues and he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. One of the greatest phrases is next, for I am gentle and humble in heart. This is a peek into who Jesus is at his very core. He's not judgmental. He's not angry. He's not looking to blame you for anything. No, he's gentle and he's humble in heart. And then he says, again, he reiterates it, you will find rest for your souls. Not just rest for your body, rest for your souls. This is a different type of rest than a nice 2-hour power nap, which isn't really a power nap, right? But it's better than a sleeping 12 hours,
Yeah.
from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. This is a soul-satisfying rest, and this is the invitation of Jesus.
Spiritual realm, right?
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
yeah,
It's not adding to this. In fact, he's taking on the load for us. And so in this mental health conversation, maybe that's the burden that you're carrying. At the end of the night, we just want you to know, listen, Jesus is inviting you
Yeah.
into his presence,
Yeah.
and he's offering soul-satisfying rest.
yeah, yeah. That's so good. That's so good.
And even though that's true, even though that's good news and that's encouragement, here's what it doesn't dismiss. It doesn't dismiss the hardships and the sufferings that we're still going to face. in
Right.
this
Like
life.
you mentioned earlier, just, it doesn't, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You mentioned it didn't give you, immediate victory or any of that. He says,
No.
and I will give you rest. So the question has to be asked, right? Because all of us go through it at some point or another, but we talk about suffering. How do you deal with suffering?
Yeah, I think this is the answer to that is found right there in that passage. It is about connection. It's about connecting, because we're going to have to face suffering. We're going to have to face these things. How do we deal with suffering? We have to connect, and perhaps we could say it this way: we have to connect body and spirit. There are issues physically that we can do to address things physically, but from a spiritual standpoint, what we want to do is realize that we cannot do this alone. That invitation is very strategic. The reason oftentimes we're heavy laden and burdened is because we're spinning, and we're trying to do things on our own that we can't. And in fact, when God is out of the picture, the whole interpretation of life changes. And here is the creator of the universe saying, "Come to me, come to me." And we might think, well, God is God. How does He know? How does He know? I mean, He's God. I mean, that's a fair question.
Yeah.
And the answer is God knows, because God became a human, called the incarnation. And He was tempted every way we were. He suffered every way we were. It says, yet without sin. Whew, that's a discussion for another day. But wow, He knows,
Yeah.
because He became a human. And that's another discussion that has a lot of implications to it. But the fact is, God does know. And so connecting to Jesus is is really an important aspect of that, connecting to Christ, taking advantage of that invitation. And that's number one, is to connecting to our Creator through the person of Christ. And because of this too, the gospel of Christ is really the answer to the problem of our greatest problem, and that is sin. Sin in the world, being sinned against, and our own sinful choices. And the gospel is the answer to all of those. And it's about unpacking that and what that means very practically.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing we need to connect to is God's people.
Yeah.
The body of Christ, the resources God has given us. We can't handle this alone. We can't. In fact, I don't know. I know I've been caught up in the anxiety I call is the what ifs out of control.
Yeah.
All the what ifs, and I can't answer, and I don't have an answer for the what ifs.
Yeah.
And so you can spin and spin and spin, and I need sometimes somebody speaking truth into my life. In fact, the Bible says that we need it every day.
Yeah.
It says to encourage each other while the day is still called today. So that's a daily thing that we're going to need.
Yeah.
And part of it might be that. In fact, we flourish in relationships rather than isolation, don't we?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes talks about that it says that it basically shame on the person who falls down and has nobody to pick him up.
Yeah.
How can someone fall down and he doesn't have anybody to pick him up? Like the importance of relationships, and it kind of ties it all back to a three-chord strand, right, is not easily broken.
Community is huge, and if only we realized what proximity to Christ could do for not only our mental health, but also our physical health, because, right, sometimes those two are intertwined. But if only we could step out and just realize, wow, proximity to Christ, come to me.
So I think that's the goal. See, here our goal, it can sometimes be short-sighted. We want a cure because it feels awful.
Yeah.
And who of us wants to always feel awful?
Yeah.
But sometimes the cure isn't there, as we mentioned before. We can even spiritualize the idea of just a cure. We could call it victory.
Yeah.
I want to have victory over this.
Sure.
And the problem might be, though, for some is it what I'm really looking for is for it to go away. I just want it to go away. Some hardship does not go away.
Yeah.
And really, what God does promise, He promises a way through.
Yeah.
He promises a way through. And here's the greatest thing. If you can imagine, the creator of the universe promises this. The one who spoke the world into existence says this. This is what he promises through his presence. I will never leave you. Well, just ponder that. But then, if that's not enough, he says, and I will never forsake you. So in Christ, he'll never leave you. And even if you think you've really messed up royally, and you think, man, God must be angry. No, he says, I won't even forsake you. I'll never leave you, because I'm always with you, even to the end of the age. And I'm not even going to forsake you. And so he promises, so that when he says there's no temptation that's overcome you, and that God is faithful, means he's not given up. It's based on his faithfulness. And with every temptation, trial, difficulty, anxiety, he will provide a way through it. Not an escape from it, but a way through it, walking with us.
That's great stuff. With just a couple minutes left on the clock here, so let's talk about this. So I'm sitting out here in the audience, or maybe I'm listening at home on YouTube or watching on the Facebook Live. Why should we care about any of this? Like, with just a couple of minutes left, why should I care about any of this?
Well, certainly, absolutely God cares.
Yeah.
And the demonstration of God caring for us is, again, taking care of that huge problem, and that is sin.
Yeah.
And all the dimensions that we talked about.
Yeah.
God cares. How do we know? Look at the cross. Christ died to take care of the consequences of sin, personally, in the world, and in the world to come.
Yeah.
Well, why should I care? Because God cares, and I know that others care.
Yeah.
Your family does care. I'm sure your youth leader or the people that brought you here care.
Yeah.
Other people care. It may not seem like it sometimes. It may not seem like it, but it is true.
Yeah.
But
What's something that we can? What's something that we could do with this information? Thinking like maybe I'm sitting in the audience and I'm someone who is again wrestling with anxiety or depression, or maybe I know someone who's struggling or at one point struggled with anxiety and depression. Like, how can we? What are some practical steps that we can leave them with?
Well, I would suggest two things. First, ask the question, is this a crisis? And, crisis meaning it needs immediate attention. Maybe you're so overwhelmed, almost to the point where you can hardly function. It's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to do things. You're in a hopeless despair. What's the use? What's the point in even going on? I mean, maybe even so dark that even suicidal thoughts come to mind. These things need attention.
Yep.
And it's going to be hard to sort that out by yourself. Please, don't try to sort it out by yourself. If these things are true, get immediate help.
Yeah.
Maybe when you get home, it'd be good to see your healthcare provider, your pastor, but even tonight, perhaps.
A youth leader, a counselor.
Youth leader, yeah.
a
Talk to
lead
your counselor. Talk to your youth leader. Say, no, this has been some dark stuff.
Yeah.
And it's been hard to shake. And it's important.
Yeah.
Even tonight, maybe the struggle isn't that dark, but it's nagging. It's always there. It's just
persistent.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Still, connect with somebody.
Yeah.
Make that a point. Connect with a spiritual leader, somebody who's older, wiser, knows the word, that kind of a thing. Obviously, the whole point in connecting with somebody isn't just to connect with somebody, but they help you connect to Christ.
Right. Again, it's that proximity to Christ.
That's right.
It's that proximity.
This is going to require a little humility, though, because sometimes we just say, "I got this.
Right.
And we don't. Sometimes we don't. We need other people.
Yeah.
So we need humility as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback off that, 1 Peter talks about this. 1 Peter chapter 5, specifically verses 6 and 7 say, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your," what? Anxiety on him.
That's our theme verse, right?
Because he cares for you. Absolutely. There's the reason, right? Why do I care about it? Because he cares for us.
Yeah.
So we're going to cast our anxiety on him, but it's going to require humility on our part. But then if you go past verse 7 and read just a little bit longer, verse 10 says this: after you have suffered for a little while, right? You're going to suffer.
Yeah, it's not a question of if, it's when.
It's when. Life is going to bring hardships your way.
Yeah.
After you've suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, giving you things you don't deserve, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you.
Wow.
That is the benefit to connecting with people who are going to connect you with Christ. And it's going to take humility. Nobody likes admitting that they have a deficiency, that there's something they're struggling with, that there's something wrong, right? We don't want to show the weak side of ourselves, but in that humility, the grace of God reaches us there, and we're able to cast those anxieties on him because he cares for us.
God gives grace to the humble.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that physical care that's important in this as well. Sleep, eating healthy as much as you can, exercise, all of that. Those are important elements to this.
Yeah.
Checking in with your doctor, that might be an important piece. And then the spiritual care.
Yeah.
Connecting to Christ, connecting to God's people, connecting, good church, the Word, prayer, learning these things, a discipler, somebody that can spiritually mentor you.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Can we just tie this up with, again, we really want this to be encouraging to you. We don't want this to be a beat you up type podcast.
Of
really, we just read it, right? We cast our anxieties on the Lord because he cares for us.
Yeah.
And we talked about looking at the cross, right? That's the biggest demonstration that he actually does care for us, is that he actually gave his life so that we can be forgiven of our sin and have hope and a relationship with him.
Yeah.
But in John 10:10, which actually was the snow camp verse last year, John 10:10 says this, "The thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy," which I think is evident in this culture right now
Sure.
with the mental health crisis that we're in.
Yep.
The thief is coming to destroy you, including your mind, right? Including the what ifs.
Yeah.
He wants to feed those to you all the time. He wants you to be depressed. But then Jesus says this, "But I came that you may have life and have it abundantly."
Yeah.
That's what we want, right? We talk
Right.
about Matthew 11. We
Yeah.
want the rest for our souls, but we want this abundant life as well, including in the realm of our mental health. And Jesus offers it to us. He cares so deeply for us that he doesn't want to just give us the eternal life. He wants to give us an abundant life here and now. It doesn't mean that the sufferings and the hardships will go away.
Yeah.
But like Joe said, it means that he's going to be with us through it all. He's going to teach us the skill of living, how to endure sufferings and hardships and cling closely to Christ. Really, I'll read it one more time.
Yeah, read it.
Matthew
we
11.
could put that up again.
Because we really want to hammer this home. This
Yeah.
is the invitation that Jesus is offering.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
or you're further along in that, the invitation from Jesus is, "Come
Yeah.
to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light."
That's right.
Struggle with anxiety, you struggle with depression, maybe you've gone further and you've had suicidal ideations, come back to Jesus.
Yeah.
Because the rest for your souls is found in his caring arms.
And he's inviting you still today. He is still inviting you all to come to me, right? Come to Jesus.
He'll never stop that invitation.
And so with that, I mean, as you guys are thinking, again, maybe some of you are struggling with anxiety and depression. Maybe you know somebody. If you're struggling with anxiety and depression, guys, talk about it. Please don't suffer in silence. Our counselors are equipped and ready to have conversations. Lead counselors, a youth leader, a youth pastor, a pastor back home, a discipler, a parent, a sibling. Talk about it. Please don't suffer in silence. And maybe you're not struggling with anxiety and depression, but you know someone who is struggling. Have a conversation with them. Encourage them to talk about it, to not bottle it up and suffer alone, right? So, Joe, any final thoughts?
Just a few resources to, especially youth leaders, youth pastors that are here this weekend. One of the books that I mentioned by Dr. Mike Emlet, Saints, Sufferers, and Sinners, that's something that I would highly recommend, that whole discussion on all the dynamic of living in a fallen world.
Yeah.
Another little booklet, there's also a book by the same title, written by Paul Tripp, Suffering, Eternity Makes a Difference, Anxiety, The Anatomy and Cure by Pastor Robert Kellman, one on depression, actually two on depression, one written by Dr. Ed Welch from CCEF, and another one, Depression, the Sun Always Rises. So I think these are smaller booklet kind of forms, so might be something to be helpful, at least initially.
Love it. If you're looking for rest, the best place to find that is in proximity to Jesus. He is inviting you today. He'll be inviting you tomorrow. Come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have run out of time for our podcast. I apologize to Chris DeCola. We'll get you next time. With that, thank you, and we'll see you at the cardboard sled demo.